Falcons come out flat on both sides of the ball and disappoint in a 34-14 beatdown by the Seattle Seahawks.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. Drew, aka Mr. aka, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for far too long, almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I think each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers, that means you make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is so simple, so easy, guys, is subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are doing our rapid reaction to the Falcons' Week 7 loss to the Seattle Seahawks, losing that game 34-14. We will be praising Bijan Robinson. We'll talk about how this team can turn the page and get a better performance next week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But first, we got to talk about the very flat, very disappointing performances on both sides of the ball, starting out with the offense before we move to the defense. And in this game, you had a flat passing game, was really not that effective. The run game was working, right? We'll talk about it, Bijan and sort of that whole thing later. The defense struggled. We'll talk about that later as well. You had self-inflicted wounds, right? Those are sort of things that we've seen the Falcons commit from time to time. And this game, I think, was probably one of their worst offending games, right? Where you had Seattle getting a self-inflicted wound where they had a wound where they had to settle for 3 points after a holding call sort of wiped out a thing on their opening drive. And then the Falcons had those thereafter, right? They had a couple of false starts on their opening drive that kind of pushed them out of field goal range in that drive and forced them to punt. You had the second series where Kirk Cousins missed Ray-Ray McCloud, an open Ray-Ray McCloud on a third down, and then Younghoe Koo missed a 54-yard field goal. And then the second half, it seemed like your defense got a stop that you needed to get back into the game after scoring on the opening drive of the second half. And then Damon Harris, who was filling in for an injured Lorenzo Carter in this game, he had a roughing the passer penalty on a third down. One of my Locked On Falcons insiders told me that he got tripped into the quarterback. I have to go back and rewatch the replay to sort of confirm that. But basically, the ref saw him going low on Geno Smith, and they threw the flag. And then, I think the very next play, Kenneth Walker beat Caden Ellis on a 17-yard score. And so, those were points that 7 points instead of 3 points that you potentially gave up. And so after that Walker score, I think it was like 24-14 at that point that the Falcons were down. And if you kind of change the outcome of these 3 plays that we're talking about, these 3 sort of self-inflicted wounds on 3 different series in this game, like you could have easily, gotten 3 points on that opening drive. You could have easily, gotten a touchdown on that second drive or whatever. But at the very least, like the game probably should have been 20-20 if the Falcons weren't having those self-inflicted wounds rather than 24-14 at that point in time. And then who knows what happens in the last 18 minutes of the game, but they probably go a lot better because you're going to be able to stay more balanced in your offense because the Falcons down 2 scores that late in the game, after that Walker touchdown, they had to get into a pass heavy attack. And they went 3 and out on the very next series because of that pass heavy attack, because as we discussed, the passing game was not really working for the Falcons. But, you still managed to get a stop at the end of the third quarter. You're still down 10 points. You're driving, near midfield, and, Kirk gets outside the pocket and tries to get rid of the ball too late. It's too late. The ball gets knocked out by Boye Mafe on his windup, and then Derek Hall scoops up that loose ball, returns it 45 yards for a touchdown. And at that point in time, down 31-14, the game is pretty much over. Shout out to my guy, Kyle Hinton, on that particular play, not showing great effort going after that loose ball. Keep getting them checks, Kyle. Appreciate you, my guy. But then you saw Kirk, have 2 more turnovers on the ensuing possessions with 2 interceptions. He missed high on a throw to Drake London on the next series. And Julian Love picked it off, although I think that interception was more on Drake London. It hit him in the hands. So same Kirk missed high is probably not accurate. He threw high, but I think he threw the ball to where he needed to throw it for Drake London to come down with that catch. But he was high on a lot of throws, including the next interception, his second interception of the game, where he threw too high to Kyle Pitts. And, I think Kobe Bryant, not the late, great Kobe Bryant, but the Seahawks safety, Kobe Bryant, was able to pick off that pass. And then we got to see a little bit of Michael Penix. He got his first action of the game. I know that leads us to the Kirk Cousins chaos meter, right? Where, one of those levels of that chaos is like, is it Michael Penix time? It was Michael Penix time at the end of this game, but it was a lot of backups in the game at that point in time because Falcons were down 20 points at that point. And it was just like, okay, let's see what these backups had. And you got to see something from, Michael Penix. You got to see something from Jace McCullough, Casey Washington, and whatnot. So if you're, on team, these rookies are going to save our season, you got a couple of flashes on that final series there. But let's talk about the Kirk Cousins chaos meter. For those of you that are not familiar with that chaos meter, we do this every single time on these rapid reactions following the game, sort of giving you my thoughts on Kirk Cousins' performance. This is something that we inherited from Locked On Vikings host Luke Braun. He used to put it out on Twitter as a graphic. We just kind of talk about it on the podcast because we don't fool with Twitter no more. But the Kirk Cousins chaos meter is you have 5 different levels. You have level 1, which is Kirk being very unchaotic, which is, very conservative, too conservative for his own good. Level 2 is game manager Kirk, where, he's out there managing the game properly. And level 3 is kind of the perfect peak version of Kirk Cousins, where it's a little bit of chaos. You inject a little bit of chaos into the game manager version of Kirk. You get level 3. That is peak Kirk at his best, where he's being a little chaotic, but he's taking chances, all those various things. We've seen a couple of those games so far this season. We've seen a couple of level 2 games. We haven't had a level 4 game since week 1, that Steelers game. And this week we're going to get another level 4. That is the Kirk Cousins chaos, right? Level 5 is, of course, is it time to see Michael Penix? I know some of you guys are ready to go automatically level 5 every single week. We are not there yet at all after this game. So this was a level 4 Kirk chaos game. And to be honest with you, I don't think Kirk, he was not on in this game, but I don't think it was particularly a chaotic game for the first 3 quarters until that fumble. And then even then I was like, I was telling one of the Locked On Falcons insiders during the game, who can ask these questions, like, is this a level 4 game or whatever? And it's like that play was a level 4 play, but I don't know if this was a level 4 game. And then, of course, Kirk proceeded to throw 2 more interceptions. And so it's like, okay, yeah, if I was borderline, being like, I probably would have to give it a level 4 just because of that fumble and Kirk not being great because it doesn't really fit in the other categories. But after that point, Kirk was like, oh, you want chaos, my guy? I'm going to give you chaos, Aaron. So there will be no disputing on that. So not the great day from Kirk Cousins in this game, and hopefully he'll bounce back and whatnot. But we'll talk less about the Falcons offense moving forward. We'll talk more about the run game and why Bijan Robinson was able to get that thing going. But let's talk more about this Falcons defense and their struggles again, because it wasn't just Kirk Cousins that came out flat. This Falcons defense had an uncharacteristic, explosive day, or Seattle had a very explosive day, which is uncharacteristic to what this Falcons defense has allowed this season. We'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And, I went to a Halloween party last night. It's a spooky season, and there were people there in costumes and masks and whatnot. But I know sometimes we feel like in our everyday lives, we're wearing a mask, whether that's at work, social settings, or just around family. And therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you can take off that mask. Therapy has taught me positive coping skills, like you can control what you can control. And I use that every single Sunday when I watch the Atlanta Falcons. And I was especially using that this Sunday. And it helps empower me to be a better version of myself. And that's what therapy helps me with. It's not just for the people that have experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You can fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist quickly, and then you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp by visiting BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Time is a precious commodity, and sometimes I find myself disappointed with how much time I feel like I'm wasting scrolling mindlessly on my phone. And I feel like, man, that time would be better served trying to find ways to improve myself, right? And I think Hillsdale College, our proud sponsor of today's episode, is helping me, take advantage of that time by offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses on history, politics, economics, philosophy, chemistry, and mathematics. All their courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings and quizzes and discussions, or you can just sit back and enjoy the lectures. So if you want to take advantage of using your time more wisely, go right now to hillsdale.edu/locked-on to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked-on to register. hillsdale.edu/locked-on. So we saw the Falcons bend but don't break defense. Oh, no, we didn't see that because they kept bending, they kept breaking on this day. And, we went into this game thinking, okay, like we'll see the bend but don't break defense. Seattle's going to dink and dunk their way, and maybe we'll get a Jesse Bates interception when Seattle gets a little too greedy. We talked about that in the crossover with Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. But instead, we didn't get the dink and dunk game because Seattle was able to dial up those explosive plays. And that's what I mean, where it's like this was uncharacteristic of this Falcons defense. The one good thing that this defense has done, they're not good in any other category, or they're average in certain areas like red zone defense and whatnot, but everything else they're pretty bad at. The one thing that they're elite at, if you want to call it that, is because they're the defense that has given up the fewest number of explosive plays this season, with 12 in the first 6 games of the season, and they give up 6 in this game. I thought it was only 4, and I checked the stat sheet and it was like, no, it was actually 6, all in the first half, and that was a big reason why they fell into that 17-7 halftime hole. You had 3 from DK Metcalf. He had a 22-yard gain on the opening series on a busted coverage where he was wide open. Gonna have to check the film to see what that's all about. Then he had a 35-yard gain on a Jackson Smith and Jigba pass, right, where it looked like AJ Terrell was covering him deep and lost the ball in the lights, and DK was able to snag that one. And then he had a 31-yard touchdown where he beat Terrell on a post route, but it looked like that was more on Justin Simmons being out of position with his too high look, and then Nate Landman not necessarily covering the seam or whatever, and AJ expecting some inside help from one of those two guys on that particular play and not getting it. And he was able to, DK that is, able to beat AJ on that particular play. You had Noah Fant, chilling, Noah Fant's been quiet in the Seattle offense, but he got 2 explosive plays, a crosser where it looked like he beat Justin Simmons early in the game. And then there was a play where Geno Smith got outside the pocket and then did a little flip pass back to him. He got behind the defense and was able to run for like 28 more yards. And then you had a Kenneth Walker 20-yard rushing touchdown where he just outran, Jesse Bates, who took a bad angle on that play, and he was able to get that touchdown and whatnot. And so, we've talked about how this defense is, right? With this style of defense is bend but don't break. But my concern was, like, once they face a good quarterback, what is a good quarterback going to do against this defense? And we've seen a couple of times with Patrick Mahomes. Now we've seen it with Geno Smith. And again, I know a lot of people are like, Geno Smith's not good. Geno's been playing pretty good this year. If you've been watching the Seahawks offense, again, it's not has been perfect by any means, but Geno's been playing pretty good, and he's certainly qualified as a good quarterback based off of how he's played the first 6 games of the season. And, going up against good quarterbacks without an effective pass rush, those guys are really going to have, an effective day, right? That's the thing that we've said consistently on this podcast over the years. The only way that you can slow down good quarterbacks is getting pressure. The Falcons don't get pressure because they're dead last in the NFL in sacks. They were able to get some pressure in this game. They were able to get Geno outside the pocket, but he was able to extend some plays, avoid some pressure and whatnot. So it wasn't as if the Falcons got 0 pressure in this game, but it wasn't good enough at this point in time with this bend but don't break defense to mask for some of the breakdowns that were going on in the secondary at the second level and whatnot. So we'll have to sort of see if this is a start of a new trend for this defense that has been doing a lot of bending but not very little breaking, because they don't give up the explosive plays, because they tend to get, more stops than they give up in the red zone and whatnot. And so did they kind of run out of mojo, 7 games into the season, as we saw sort of that uncharacteristic performance today against Seattle's offense, and Tampa Bay is going to be licking their chops, who the Falcons face in week 8. And we'll see, and we'll talk later about how the Falcons kind of respond to this loss. coming up on today's episode. But I do want to get to a question from the Locked On Falcons Discord from D Best. Link in the description below if you want to submit your questions. He says, Aaron, Sirius Black, our humble host, so far this season, even though the rocky in the beginning, I feel like our offensive coaches lived up to the hype, or at least got what they're supposed to get out of the talent from that side of the ball. Can you break down how the defensive staff is letting us down with nearly identical but slightly upgraded defensive personnel? At this point, it's feeling like letting Nielsen go may have been a mistake unless he wanted to leave. So, yes, Ryan Nielsen wanted to leave, talking about controlling what you can control. He wasn't going to sit back and let Raheem Morris, who probably was not going to retain him, make that decision for him. And so he chose to leave Jacksonville. And so he could control his destiny in that regard. So I don't think Ryan Nielsen was ever a realistic option to return for the Falcons, but it is what it is. And yeah, we've talked about it a bunch on this podcast, D-Best. I'm assuming you're Devon Best, the Hawaii legendary wide receiver, that also played for the Miami Dolphins. That's how illustrious we are. We got, legendary. I'm joking, guys. Trying to keep it light on today's episode, so you don't freak out. But I think we've talked about this a number of times where this Falcons defensive philosophy is very bend but don't break. It's very passive. They're going to play a lot of off coverage. They're going to play a lot of zone coverage, right? They're entirely designed to basically, we're going to concede 5 or 6 yards and you're going to wind up shooting yourself in the foot eventually. And that will allow us to force you to punt the ball or settle for 3 points instead of scoring 7. And as long as our offense is clicking, if our offense is scoring 7 and we're forcing you to settle for 3, we're going to win a lot of close games. As we discussed before, roughly half of NFL games are decided by 1 score or less. And that, 1 or 2 of those breaks can be the difference in winning and losing those games. And we've seen that with the Falcons getting off to the 4-2 start, where it has gone in their favor. It did not go in their favor this week. The offense was not performing. The defense was not doing their job in terms of doing that bend but don't break. And again, eventually we're going to get one of these games, I think, especially thinking going up against capable quarterbacks, that if we can't pressure them, they're going to find, and especially with a receiver core that Seattle has, we'll have a similar conversation, about Tampa Bay next week with their receiver core, with capable quarterbacks, good weapons, a competent offensive line. Minnesota later in the season, we'll see about Dallas. I know they're going through their issues, but all these teams are sort of built to kind of attack this type of defense. And without the offense, scoring at a high level, without you getting turnovers, without you getting those stops, this defensive scheme is not really built to stop teams. It's really just built to, give up those yards. Like it's basically, as I said, like we're going to give you 5 or 6 yards. We're not going to give you 50 or 60 yards. And eventually you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, either because you're going to have to convert, multiple third downs, and then the advantage flips to the defense, because typically, not necessarily always with this Falcons defense, but typically good NFL offenses convert less than 50% of their third down. So if you can usually get a team to 2 or more third downs, the advantage flips to the defense on any given drive. And typically over the course of, 8, 10, 12 plays that the Falcons defense likes to get, you'll get multiple of those third downs. And so that's why this defense is disappointing, because that's how they play. And I don't think that's a very sustainable way to play high-level defense. I think that's the style of play that can win you, that can be good enough, that we've talked about a number of times on this podcast over the last months, to win you football games. And through 6 games, that was the case. But as the season wears on and offenses adjust and teams adjust, and, the attrition with injuries and whatnot, as we've seen in recent weeks, with Troy Anderson, with Nate Landman, with Lorenzo Carter, with others as well. Justin Simmons dealing with some hamstring issues in this game. That how sustainable is that style of play, especially if your offense has an off day like we saw on this particular Sunday. So I hope D-Best that better explains it, and we'll just have to see if the Falcons can kind of pick it up and adjust that philosophy. Again, I'm not expecting, wholesale changes or whatever. I'm just hoping like they just can be a more consistent version of that type of defense, so that we don't get more games like this against Seattle, and we can still win those sort of tight ball games that we have, won 4 of so far this year. So we'll see on that front, but we'll talk a little bit more positively and highlight Bijan Robinson's impressive days, as well as talk about how this team responds to this loss as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So NFL fans, make sure you start this year with a big return over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, go to the same place that you can place your bets. It's the same page that give you all the updates, the latest stats, the live play-by-play. For example, when I started recording this game, it was halftime between Washington and Carolina, and Washington was up 27-0 at halftime. And so FanDuel was like, oh, okay. Like, if you put your money on Washington, you're feeling great about that bet. But if you made a mistake and you were like, hey, Carolina's got it this week, you can go and hedge. You can go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book, and the line changes. And now it's a 28.5 point line. If you feel like Carolina can come back, or you feel like, you know what, I already wasted my money on Carolina, let me go on Washington. That's the beautiful thing that you can do at FanDuel, at FanDuel.com. And of course, if you're just getting started at FanDuel, if you haven't been there, all you got to do is get started today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, guys, when you place your first $5 bet. So go check it out, at FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So I joked on the postcast with Tanitra Batiste and Jarvis Davis on Locked On Sports Atlanta that, this game was purely a highlight reel day for Bijan Robinson. And if you're going to rewatch this game, and I don't highly recommend it, just let me do it. I do the film stuff. Go check out the extended all 22 review on Tuesday night on YouTube, Wednesday on your preferred podcast platform, as well as the extended all 22 for the Locked On Falcons Insider, where I show you the actual clips in the game. Hit the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons to become a Locked On Falcons Insider. But basically, if you're going to rewatch this game, just watch the Bijan plays. If Bijan isn't a target or carrying the football, there's nothing in this game for you, right? That's basically what I'm saying. So he had his first 100-yard rushing game of the season, finishing with 21 carries for 103 yards and a touchdown. He had 40 yards receiving on 3 catches, including a 26-yard check down where he somehow squeezed past 2 defenders on the sideline and almost seemingly scored if he could just beat that last defender. And then he had like an incredible one-handed catch on a 6-yard check down. Again, it was only 6 yards, but it was just like, hey, look, this is highlight reel stuff. So I'm looking forward to the Baldy breakdown that he's going to inevitably do on Twitter. Of course, he's not going to do it because Brian Baldinger, I'm calling you out, Pete Baldy. You're a front runner. You're not going to do a highlight reel on Bijan because the Falcons lost. You're going to wind up, highlighting some bad play on the Falcons defense or whatever. Yeah, I said it. So, but Bijan definitely a Baldy breakdown, if you're asking. As I said many times on this podcast over the last couple of weeks and mentioned before with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta a couple of weeks ago or whatever, Bijan is the best player on the team. He's incredible. It's like the 2 best players on the football team. When you go back and watch the film each and every week, is Bijan Robinson, it's Jesse Bates. And if you were doubting that, you got your confirmation today by watching this game. So let's put a button on this game before we move on to next week's action. Went into this game thinking it was a toss-up game with Seattle. Thought it would be closer for all the reasons we talked about. It wasn't, the poor passing game, the poor defense, the self-inflicted wounds, all that stuff. So it's not shocking to me that the Falcons lost to Seattle. It's just shocking in the manner that they did it, sort of just never really showing up in this game. And especially I think it's disappointing to a lot of folks because you're looking at the trajectory of these 2 teams where Seattle is on a downward trend, losing 3 straight. Atlanta is on this upward trend over the last 3, winning 3 straight. And sort of if you're just judging it by what, that recency bias, you're just sort of assuming, oh, yeah, the Falcons will just keep that going and Seattle will lose 4 straight and Atlanta will win 4 straight. And again, that's what most fans do when it comes to that, just having that recency bias. And, whatever you did the previous week is what you're going to do the following week. So, again, watching this game, not shocked by the actual result, but was not shocked, but surprised by how flat they were, right? I wasn't expecting it in this game, but like it's going to happen over the course of a 17-game season. Winning football games is hard. We talked about that a ton of times. It's one of the reasons why we don't overreact to losses here on this illustrious podcast. But, you're going to get a game or 2, in previous Falcon season, multiple games. Hopefully we just only talk about one of these games. Or 2, I guess, if we're counting the week 1 game, but we flush that game away. We don't factor that one in. But you're going to get a game like this where you're just kind of flat and you just don't have it and you didn't quite show up, and so it doesn't need to be sort of a season-defining sort of game for you if you can kind of move off of it. So I don't think it's the end of the world, but you're going to have people for obvious reasons because we're fans, we're emotional. I get it. Let it all out on Sunday and then figure it out on Monday. But, you're going to have very strong, reactions to this. People are going to talk like the season's over or something like that. That's fine, right? But it's like you got to You got to slow your roll a little bit. You were too far ahead. Some people after the last 3 wins are like starting to penciling your plans, for what New Orleans in the Super Bowl or whatever. Like, oh, let's pump the brakes on that. And then you're not going, well, now we got to tank for the number 1 pick again. I know those are extreme overreactions in either direction, but you get that sort of thing. So I say pump the brakes. We try to live here in the middle on this podcast. So we'll see how the Falcons respond, right? That's really, to me, the more important thing than necessarily, like, again, we can flush this game. You got to flush the toilet a couple of times, right? You just can't let it stew. So we'll flush this game away, like we did the week 1 game. And we'll see how this team responds, right? You're going to get a fired up Tampa Bay next week, regardless of what happens on Monday Night Football against the Ravens. They're going to have a chance, regardless of that outcome, to potentially overtake the Falcons in the NFC South in that weekend game. And to be honest with you, I've been kind of expecting that you were going to split with the Bucs this year, right? You got the win at home last week or a couple weeks ago on Thursday night. Are you going to get the loss on the road next week? We'll see, right? And so to me, what's going to be really important is how this team responds, coming out this flat game, right? Do they kind of circle the wagons? And so to me, next week is really the opportunity where you have a chance to have that quote unquote season defining sort of game, right? Where it's just like, can you circle the wagons? Can you nip this in the bud? Or is this going to be a thing that we saw routinely under Arthur Smith or routinely under, Dan Quinn over the years under this new Raheem Morris coaching staff of, with Dan Quinn, it was always like, once that ball started getting rolling where the Falcons would have some negative, they go on these long losing streaks and whatnot. Do you follow up a 3-game winning streak with a 2-game losing streak or whatever? And potentially then we're having a conversation about, losing 3 or more in a row. So that to me is going to be really the question that we're going to have heading into this week. So I think next week game has that potential to be that season defining type of game because you either rebound and bounce back and play good football and potentially win that game against Tampa Bay, or you continue to struggle, which we've seen this Falcons team under previous regimes do so, when, that sort of quicksand effect where things start to mount, the negative things start to mount on you. So that to me is really kind of my takeaway from this game. We'll watch the film, obviously. We'll break it down as this week, but then we'll move on and see sort of how do you respond and build it back against Tampa Bay next week. And that's going to be really important for this football team moving forward. So those are my thoughts on this game. Not a whole lot of positives from this game. Don't think people should get too bent out of shape over it. And again, next week is basically what I'm saying. Just hold your freak out for a couple more days and then freak out next Sunday if the Falcons lose that game or come out flat again. So that is much more appropriate if you ask me. But sound off in the comments. Let me know what you think. Become a Locked On Falcons insider. Join the Discord. All those links are in the description below. Make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. We'll have you covered all week long on this game and the next game. And make sure you check out Locked On NFL as your second listen to get the recap on what's going down with the rest of the NFL teams on this illustrious Sunday. Go check out Locked On Commanders to see if they wound up holding on. You want to hear about a good football team? Go check out. I'm kidding, guys. Go do something. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Hopefully, you'll get to watch some good football at some point later this Sunday because the Falcons did not fulfill their end of the bargain on that. So make sure you check out Locked On NFL. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every